What evidence has the U.S. or Britain presented showing that the Syrian government definitively used chemical weapons in the attack in Ghouta?
So far, no evidence has been presented as to who carried out this attack. The reports that will come from the UN inspectors will not include an investigation of who carried out the attack. Their mandate is quite narrow, just to find out what was used. Was it indeed a chemical weapon, as is assumed, but not certainly proven yet? But they will not be bringing in evidence of who carried it out. There is a report yesterday in Yediot Aharonot, the Israeli mass daily, claiming that it was Israeli officials who provided the Obama administration with what is considered by Obama's people, apparently, to be definitive proof that it was the regime in Syria. We have yet to see any of that information. So far, it is simply the assertion by Vice President Biden, implied by Secretary Kerry and others, that there is evidence. It has not been seen.
And Phyllis Bennis, what kind of legal justification, then, do you think that the Obama administration might use for this? And what kinds of options are available to him?
Well, you know, the decision to go to the Security Council that the British are doing today is, as you mentioned earlier, guaranteed to get a veto, certainly by Russia, likely by China as well. Although it's conceivable China could abstain, but they're likely to veto. They may not even get 9 sufficient votes. But what's dangerous here is that the United Nations Charter, which is the fundamental component of international law governing issues of war and peace, is very, very clear on what constitutes the legal use of military force. There is no question that having used chemical weapons, whoever used it, is a huge war crime. It's a specific violation of the Chemical Weapons Treaty. It's also a war crime, or potentially even a crime against humanity. The problem is we don't know yet who is responsible. The U.S. is hinting that it may use the Kosovo precedent of 1999 as a way to get around the prohibition, the absolute prohibition, on using military force unless it is immediate self-defense, which no one in Washington is claiming that the use of these horrible weapons in Syria somehow threatens the United States. So that's off the table. Or that the Security Council agrees, which we know is not going to happen. The Kosovo precedent basically said in 1999, we know we can't get support from the Security Council. Russia will veto. Therefore, we won't ask the Security Council. We'll ask the NATO High Command. So they went to NATO, and what a surprise. The NATO High Command said, yes, we approve the use of military force in Kosovo. Now, the problem is twofold. One, NATO is a military structure. It's like a hammer and a nail. If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you're NATO, everything looks like it requires a military response. The other problem is legal. There is simply no legal justification that says that the NATO High Command or any other organization has the right to determine the legality of the use of force other than the UN Security Council. So if that is the justification, it will stand in complete violation of international law.
Speaking Tuesday, White House spokesperson Jay Carney ruled out regime change as one of the goals of possible military intervention.
The options that we are considering are not about regime change. They are about responding to a clear violation of an international standard that prohibits the use of chemical weapons.
That is White House spokesperson Jay Carney, Phyllis Bennis. So what is the goal of this attack? I mean, it is clear from what they're saying that they wouldn't be attacking the chemical weapons stockpiles, but the Syrian military. But they're saying they're not trying to take out the military, and they've said that within the rebels are al-Qaeda forces as well. So what is the goal here?
Well, it seems that the goal is a political goal. It's to make a statement. Oh, my God, I used a red line. I said there was a red line. I have to do something. And the only, quote, something that seems to be available is a military action. So they say it's not the goal of regime change, but if we recall, they said the same thing about Libya. The goal wasn't regime change. The goal was to degrade the capacity to attack civilians. Well, it may, but most military analysts that we're hearing from these days say it will not prevent future attacks. Crucially, this kind of a military strike, which military analysts today in the New York Times admitted from the Pentagon that it may well hit civilians because they don't have very good control over cruise missiles about where they hit. It may well hit civilians. They're saying that even now, days before they use those missiles. The goal is one thing. The accomplishment is something else. And I think that the danger here is that there will be enormous numbers potentially, maybe small numbers if people are lucky, but there will be civilian casualties. This is a political reality that can spin completely out of control and lead to massive escalations. We have to look at the what-ifs. What if there is some kind of military retaliation by the Syrian government, by the Syrian military, against U.S. targets in Afghanistan, U.S. targets elsewhere in the region, in Kuwait, in Saudi Arabia? What if there's a retaliation against Israel? Do we really think that at that point the U.S. would say, no, we're not going any further because we said this was not about regime change? These military actions have a habit of spiraling out of control. It's already an extraordinarily chaotic region where there is a great deal of instability in a number of countries. Borders have become very porous. The attacks, the U.S. NATO attacks on Libya led to the spreading of weapons throughout the region. The growing violence in Iraq is clearly linked to the attacks in Syria. So the notion that we are going to somehow escalate these attacks in Syria, rather than saying this is a moment when we desperately need diplomacy. We heard today that the U.S. just announced that the scheduled meeting between the U.S. and Russia, scheduled for today, the U.S. now said, we want to delay that. We don't want to have it. We don't think this is a good time. This is exactly the time. We need to be talking to Russia, to Iran, to all of the U.S. allies that are supporting the other side, to force the various parties to peace talks. There is no military solution. This is what Congresswoman Barbara Lee said yesterday, and it's absolutely true. There is no military solution. Extra assaults from the United States is going to make the situation worse, is going to put Syrian civilians at greater risk, not provide protection.